The Survivalist Podcast with Mark Puhale and Matt Gould. In each episode of The Survivalist Podcast, we look at different events and catastrophes that could happen in different areas of the world. Then we give you the knowledge, resources, and recommendations you need to survive. We'll explore scenarios from a worldwide financial collapse to a coordinated terrorist attack to a global climate catastrophe and everything in between. The Survivalist Podcast is brought to you by Survival Cash, Ford Survival Supply, and thebugoutrace.com. Please visit our website, thesurvivalistpodcast.com, for more information or to give us feedback. And now, The Survivalist Podcast with Mark Puhale and Matt Gould.
Welcome to the Survivalist Podcast. I'm Matt Gould, and I'm here with Mark Puhale. I'm a TV producer, and Mark is a survival expert. Today, we're joined by Joel Stevens. Joel is also a co-founder of Survival Cash and Forge Survival Supply, and he and Mark wrote a book together called Everyday Survival Kits, Exactly What You Need for Constant Preparedness. Today, we're going to talk about their personal stories, Joel's personal story and Mark's personal story about 9/11/01, what they went through, what the thoughts were, what it was like. And then we're going to talk about how some of the signs are lining up that a situation like that seems like a lot of the same factors are at play now as they were in 2000 and 2001.
So Joel and I wrote the Everyday Survival Kits book. What we did for each chapter is we presented a survival scenario. And what Joel talked about was his experiences just having gotten out of the United States Marine Corps as a young officer, and he was working in the metropolitan DC area. And he wrote a very, very descriptive, lengthy portion of his experience with 9/11 when the planes hit. So Joel, do you want to tell your story?
Yeah, I would just say that, like so many other people, 9/11 changed my life forever. I was fortunate that I didn't lose any loved ones or I didn't get hurt myself, but I think like a lot of Americans that day, a lot of the innocence was lost when those planes hit those towers and also the Pentagon. That day just was so regular, everyday, occurrence. I woke up, got ready for work, went over to my buddy's house, and we commuted together. We worked for the same company. So we had about a 45-minute reverse commute from Arlington, Virginia, out to Dulles. We were there, and everything was just kind of a normal day. And then all of a sudden, I remember very clearly someone kind of coming into the office saying, "Turn on the TV, a plane just hit the Trade Center." And so, we were kind of like really confused, like we turned on the TV and it just, we were looking at a picture from quite a bit of a distance away from the Trade Center, and it just showed some smoke coming out. And at that time, it looked like it was probably just like, some type of Cessna or small single-engine aircraft that hit, and some smoke was billowing out of the Trade Center. To be honest with you, I had no idea that, an actual, Airbus or a Boeing jet had actually hit the Trade Center. All of a sudden, another plane hits the Trade Center, and I just remember thinking to myself, like, oh, that's weird. Like, how did they do that editing to show the plane hitting the Trade Center again? And then that's when it just kind of dawned on me that a second plane had actually hit the Trade Center, and, what the hell was happening? A news flash came across that a plane had hit the Pentagon, and that's when me and my friend, who was actually a former FBI agent, we just kind of looked at each other and we're like, let's get out of here. I mean, I remember, being very naive to what could potentially happen in a scenario like this. And you see that a lot with talking to people about kind of like their pre-9/11 mentality and their post-9/11 mentality. The pre-9/11 mentality was everything's great in America, and terrorist attacks and stuff like that. That's stuff that only happens in Israel or overseas. It never happens in America. Post 9/11 is we're all susceptible to terrorist attacks or, potentially some type of Pearl Harbor attack from another opposing country.
What was your role in the Marine Corps? You had said you just got out. What was your rank and what was your role?
Yeah, so I had gotten out of the Marine Corps as a lieutenant. I was an infantry officer. We trained to close with and destroy the enemy, rifle platoon commander. We had a mentality of very aggressive nature, weapons, knives, hand-to-hand combat, all that stuff. Both Mark and I trained on extensively. And so once something like that happens, you instantly kind of fall back on your training and go into that, military mindset.
Right. I was just trying to get at how much that affected your actions on that day. And then we're going to get into your actions in the following weeks.
Yes, I would say that training I received in the Marine Corps instantly kind of threw me into that mode of, what is this? Is this just like a limited terrorist attack? Is this something bigger? Everybody stands back now and says, oh, I knew it was just a terrorist attack. They were flying planes into buildings, blah, blah, blah. But at that time, we really didn't know what was going on. There was a lot of, what we call the fog of war. I remember driving back from the Dulles airport, and I actually lived just a few blocks from the Pentagon. And literally on the radio, they said that one of the trade centers had collapsed. And I just remember, just the silence in the car. What the heck is going on? We just didn't know. My mind was already racing a million miles ahead, thinking okay, as soon as I get home, I got to grab this and this, and I got to get out of Dodge as soon as possible because I am definitely in the affected area, and whatever's going to happen, it's only going to get worse from here.
I'll use the term prepper. How much of a prepper were you before this event?
I would say that I was a novice prepper. I grew up in the Midwest, and my father, I would say he was kind of a novice prepper too. He always had some extra food and blankets, and we had some rifles and pistols at our house, but we were not like what you watch on TV today with the doomsday preppers with the, full-on crawl space or basement stocked with food and stuff like that. Me being single, I had very, very limited stuff. We're talking about, I think I had a Glock pistol with maybe 100 rounds of ammunition. I don't even know if I even had a sleeping bag or 10. I think I just had a backpack and some very, very basic supplies that maybe I had acquired, during my time in the Marine Corps, but it was very, very basic.
I would think that everyone would want to get out of DC at this point. What were you thinking in your head? Okay, I'm going to go home. I'm going to stay at my place. I'm going to go to Iowa to see my folks.
The thoughts that were going through my head were just, how am I going to get out of this situation? We made the decision very early. I'm talking minutes after the Pentagon got hit. Me and my buddy were like, let's go.
Were your friends saying anything crazy?
Yeah, so I had absolutely no plan in place. I had no prior thoughts about bugging out. I had no ideas about where I would go. My buddy, when he walked in the door, he was very confused about the current situation as well. He had told me that there was bombs going off in D.C. and that there was dead bodies on the road. And at that time, I totally believed him. And we were just completely flabbergasted about what was going on in our country. By early afternoon, we were well on our way to West Virginia, and traffic was very light because I think the whole situation had paralyzed so many people.
And Mark, meanwhile, you were at the military base, so you were in Quantico?
Right. I was an instructor at the basic school in the warfighting instructor group at the time, and I was teaching a Marine Corps orders class. There were permanent personnel staff there watching TV, and I'm like, what in the hell are lieutenants doing watching TV during the day? I go over to look at the TV, and I'm dumbfounded at what I'm seeing with the planes hitting the towers. And pretty much immediately, the base went on high alert. We were prepared to mobilize, and we were prepared to be a force in readiness if need be, if things escalated.
Joel, these events of this day, they started a life change that ended up with you living in Colorado, right?
That's right, yeah. And I just remember, from that moment on, it's kind of like, whenever you learn a valuable lesson, man, I'm never going to let that happen to me again. That was the lesson I learned. And so then I just started researching tents and food and sleeping bags and rifles, different things. And that's, kind of became my lifelong passion. What if this happened again? Would I be ready? And then when you start to have children and get married, that also just really makes you think a lot more about survival and being prepared as well.
You're one of the most prepared guys I know. So tell me about what your setup is like as much as you can, considering operational security, I guess.
Right. The first thing I started with was my bug out bag. And at that time, I didn't even know that it was called a bug out bag. I didn't even know there was a name for it. I just wanted to get a backpack together, just based on that Marine Corps infantry mentality of everything you own is on your back. So I kind of really just started going through a pack and, creating a pack that, I could stay outside for, weeks on end, potentially catch food or hunt for food, and then also be able to survive in the, any environment. From there, it kind of morphed into, okay, what kind of weapons do I need? That's kind of morphed into, being prepared for, not only to have to bug out, but also have to stay in your home and be there for quite a bit of time, and what that means as far as food, as far as sanitation, as far as, backup power or energy, heat, everything, and obviously purifying water and stuff like that. So that's kind of where I am today is, looking at, not only a whole home bug-in situation, but also potentially having to mobilize with my family and move somewhere as well.
Tell me about, I guess, a little more detail. So it's food for how long, water for how long, geography's chosen for a specific reason.
Starting with geography, after 9/11, I just literally wanted to be out of that area because I just think that's such a high threat zone. And there's so many people, traffic's terrible without an emergency, let alone if there is an emergency. So I decided to relocate to the western United States. I live in Colorado. I live up in the Rocky Mountains at about 9,000 feet. Almost no neighbors up here. It's definitely a different lifestyle. We have backup power. We have a backup generator. We heat our entire home with wood. We are also looking at solar and potentially, some of these new batteries that are coming online, like the Tesla whole home battery. As far as food's concerned, I probably have enough food without having to walk outside my door and hunt for food to probably survive for a year to a year and a half. As far as water purification, I have several ways to purify water at my house. We are actually on a well system, so that's even better that I don't have to worry about, the city water supply coming to my house. For sanitation, again, we have our own septic system, so I don't have to worry about, the toilets flushing and stuff like that. As far as rifles and pistols are concerned, being a former Marine Corps officer, you can kind of assume that I have a wide selection of rifles and pistols and shotguns. And then I also have a considerable amount of ammunition for hunting and protection. And probably the most important thing that I've done up here in the mountains is that I've made a group of people that are like-minded, that want to be able to be okay if a bad thing happened to this country. Probably once a quarter or twice a year, we get together and kind of talk through things and agree that, we're going to help each other.
The very first conversation I ever had with you when we were talking about doing the show for National Geographic, you painted a picture for me of what you thought a major urban area like Washington, D.C. would look like if there was a massive terrorist attack or another country attacked us. One of these shit hits the fan moments. You described to me what it would be like. Do you remember that?
I do.
What were some of the things you told us? Because this is what, it's a pretty dramatic step to leave your life in one place and go to another place. There's a reason you're doing it. I'm trying to get at what is that reason?
I mean, if you look at what's going on in the whole world, look at the mass migration that's going on in Syria. You're really looking at people having to bug out, drowning at sea, fleeing major conflicts, and, all these different groups over there that are killing each other. I don't even know so much that there may be one or two groups that are organized, but really these are gangs of people that are probably trying to prey on other people to get what they want. And that same thing could actually happen here. A lot of, the survival experts or people that are in the emergency preparedness world, they always say that America is 9 meals away from anarchy. So if you think about that, after people miss their 9th meal in a row, really all bets are off. You're talking about people that, normally would be the nicest neighbors in the world, could turn around and literally stab you in the back to get food for not only themselves, but for their families. And so you've seen that time and time again in crisis, that when push comes to shove, people will do drastic things. And if you think that I'm being crazy and, whatever, I mean, just go on Black Friday to a local Walmart and see what people will do to save $200 on a flat screen TV. So it's just absolutely insane.
And you were saying that one traffic accident and then the roads are shut down, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And so you might have to look at going into a subway system and actually walking the tracks, or actually finding the, where the train tracks are and walking those, or looking for the power lines, or taking alternate roads, dirt roads, roads that maybe take you right through the city, because the interstates are just going to be an absolute parking lot. And it only takes one thing, or a roadblock. I mean, one traffic accident or a roadblock, and everybody is literally just stuck.
And then once they're stuck, if it's a long-term kind of disaster and they can't get anywhere, you were saying you better get used to eating rats.
Right, or people or whatever, because the food, with our current setup of just-in-time delivery, stores don't stock as much food as they used to. One, because we want everything organic, we want everything fresh, we want stuff to come, right out of the farm, right to our table. And so that's great. But these stores are not going to have, endless supplies of, chicken and hamburger and milk and cheese and eggs for you to grab. I mean, once those store shelves are bare, that whole system of transportation is going to be shut down, and people are going to get hungry very fast and very desperate.
So that's why you go up to the mountains, you have a year's supply of food, and part of it is you can set up a safety zone, right? And that's where the weapons come in, which is kind of a sad fact if you stop and think about it, but probably necessary, right?
It's not the way I want it to be, but honestly, just the things in my life that I've seen, and just being there for kind of when society breaks down. And one of the things I didn't touch on that happened during 9/11, when I did see that roadblock get set up, there was a lady who was trying to get to her children, and she was actually traveling on Route 50 back towards D.C. And so when they blocked off the road, she actually tried to run the roadblock. And as you can imagine, like, Pentagon's hit, Trade Center's fallen, Second Trade Center's smoking, these police are setting up a roadblock, and they have no idea what's going on. And some lady tries to run the roadblock to get to her children who are out of school, maybe a few blocks away. I mean, they had their guns drawn on her. They were like threatening to shoot her, like the engine block of her car. And I was just like literally sitting there by myself, ringside, watching this, going, "Wow, this is how crazy things get in 2 hours of something bad happening. I can only imagine what they would get in 4 to 5 days when people start running out of food."
And Mark, so being on the inside, I know you had a very specific role within the Marine Corps, and can you think about the armed services overall? And obviously the Pentagon is the head of our military, right? That's
right.
So that's what it was a direct attack on our military. Very shortly after the planes hit the towers, the planes were grounded. Next thing I saw, F-16 fighters flying up and down Manhattan. What do you think was the sort of military's overall position on that day? What were they thinking at that moment?
Well, I think, first of all, it's like, who the heck did this? Because think about it, they attacked our economy. So they hit Wall Street, they attacked the military, and they were going to attack the executive branch. But the plane went down, in Somerset, Pennsylvania. So this was outright war against us. And so, of course, being a Marine, we want to find someone to shoot, probably just like the rest of the military. Who is our enemy so we can find them, and then we want to account for all of our people. Also is, what's coming next? Are we going to expect more attacks either today, within the week, within the month, et cetera? So I think that heightened security and that heightened response was, we were a peacetime military for a long time. Complacency gets people killed. So wire went up, guard posts went up, armed guards were there, armed Marines were manning entry and exit points from the base.
And I was going to add something to what Mark was saying. The pre-9/11 mentality for the Marine Corps, Mark and I were training on, embassy rescues, tactical recovery of air personnel. I mean, and this is not really the military's fault because you can't really see into the future, but you're always kind of training for the last war. We were kind of training for a Somalia situation. I remember spending part of my time in the Marine Corps training on how to talk to, CNN and Fox News when you're over in Africa. And then the post 9/11 guys, they were training just full on for war. They were training for urban combat. They were training for, mountain operations in Afghanistan. That mentality is definitely alive and well in the prepper community as well, where the pre 9/11, people were, maybe there were some people stockpiling food for
The Y2K bug.
Y2K bug, exactly. So there were some Y2K preppers. After 9/11, I think preparedness became a lot more mainstream. And a lot of more people were like, this could potentially happen, and I'm going to have to survive, so I need to definitely have some more food. I need to have some water, some, clothing supplies, et cetera, et cetera. And, that's, I think, like Mark said, we need to remain vigilant. And just because nothing has happened in this country since Katrina, I wouldn't say any major events have happened since Katrina. That doesn't mean that something disastrous could happen tomorrow or a year from now or whatever.
Two more aspects to this topic, and then we'll wrap it up. I've heard and read that there's a lot of factors lining up which are reminiscent of things that were happening in 2000 and 2001 before the attacks. Something could be imminent again. Have you been hearing that?
As far as stuff that's imminent, those are always the best things that I love. Like anytime there's like a date on the map, like 2012, the Mayan calendar. Those are preparedness dates that I love, because like anything like that, I kind of brush off. It's the things that are just so unknown, like a computer virus attack, or a solar storm from the sun, or potentially a terrorist detonated EMP. Those are the things that are just so out of the ordinary, so hard to prepare for. Those are the things that really worry me at night. Probably the computer virus is probably the most worrisome, but our sun is constantly throwing out these crazy things now. So you just never know. And those are things that, you kind of see on the horizon that, could potentially throw the entire world for a loop. But I just don't know, how well, our country is prepared for a nuclear attack, or what that would look like, long term.
The political, I don't want to say strife, but the tension that we're seeing again between us and Russia, not necessarily China so much, but just that balance that it has to be maintained, or we might move back into a Cold War status. I also think about with ISIS, with all these refugees who are punching into Europe, and the fact that we're going to take a lot of them on board. And that leads to, what's the background check on these 80,000 people that are coming to the United States that could potentially house, how many sleeper cells could be in that group? That is worrisome to me. And then I've mentioned this before on some of the other shows that I've done. I think like things that from a preparedness standpoint, like why we wrote that book, things that worry me or bother me that we've seen as of late in Texas and South Texas is the environment, weather. Look at what the weather has done with all the rain that we've gotten from flooding and destruction of people's homes and the commerce in certain areas, tornadoes ripping the heck out of and destroying towns. I think it's likely to continue to occur, hopefully not at the magnitude that it's been like this year in South Texas, but that from a preparedness standpoint, I've always said that I would never live in a floodplain or a flood zone. I want to be next to a river, but how close do I want to be there when the river rises and my home is underwater? We've mentioned Katrina many times. There's political tension. Hopefully we're not going to launch a nuke towards one another, because if mutually assured destruction still could occur, but that doesn't mean that a dirty bomb can't get into the United States.
It's just so hard to prepare for a certain event. So I think just general preparedness, it's kind of like buying car insurance or buying homeowners insurance. You just never know what's going to happen. But if you just have just a general plan, you can adapt from that plan. So if you just have, a supply of food, if you have some water stored and ways to purify water, if you have a way to defend yourself and your family, whether guns are legal or illegal, there's other things, alternatives like bear spray or tasers or, baseball bats for that matter. And then just, the clothing, the shelter. You just have to kind of look at the whole spectrum of preparedness and just make sure you at least have a plan for every aspect of preparedness.
Joel, thanks so much for sharing your story with us. You've been very inspirational to me in how you've built a fortress for yourself in a great place, and you can enjoy life and you feel like you're master of your own destiny. And Mark, I know you have a bug out plan and a location and all kinds of stuff too. And we can get to that another time if you would share that stuff with us. So thank you. This was the Survivalist Podcast. I'm Matt Gould. I'm here with Mark Puhali, and today we had Joel Stevens. Thanks for listening.
You've been listening to the Survivalist Podcast with Mark Puhali and Matt Gould. Brought to you by Survival Cache, Ford Survival Supply, and theBugoutRace.com. Please visit our website, thesurvivalistpodcast.com. This show is produced by Chad Dugatz at the Hangar Studios in New York City.